You'll never measure up to your sister. The words didn't come with anger. They came casually, like a fact everyone at the table already accepted. We were sitting at dinner. Plates half full. Cutlery resting. That moment when conversation slows and no one expects damage. My mother said it first. My father didn't stop her. My sister didn't even look at me. She smiled into her phone. I felt the chair beneath me. Solid. Unmoving. So I stayed seated. Not because it didn't hurt, but because reacting would have given them exactly what they expected. A reaction. My mother continued, explaining how my sister had presence. How people noticed her. How she handled responsibility. She said my name only once. And even then, it sounded like an afterthought. I nodded. Slowly. The silence after that felt longer than the sentence itself. No one apologized. No one corrected it. And that told me everything. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story feels familiar, tap like. And tell me where you're listening from. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? My name is Alina, and I'm in my 20s. For most of my life, I've been the quiet one people underestimate. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I passed the salt when asked. I cleared my plate. I listened. People mistake silence for absence. But silence is where observation lives. Growing up, I was always the reliable one. The one who showed up early. Stayed late. Did what was asked without making noise. My sister was different. She spoke confidently. Moved fast. Took up space. And my parents rewarded that. Not intentionally. Just naturally. They trusted volume. They trusted certainty. And they trusted her. I learned early that pushing back only made things worse. So I stopped pushing. I started watching instead. I noticed patterns. Who interrupted whom? Who made decisions without checking? Who assumed authority meant immunity? At family events, my sister spoke on behalf of everyone. I stood nearby, holding coats, refilling glasses. People thanked me. Then forgot I was there. At work, it was similar. Different environment. Same dynamics. I wasn't ignored. I was overlooked. Which is worse. Because ignored people are noticed. Overlooked people disappear. And disappearing gave me freedom. I listened during meetings when others spoke too quickly. I read documents people skimmed. I noticed when timelines didn't match explanations. I didn't correct them. Correction invites resistance. Documentation invites consequences. By the time my sister was formally placed into a position of authority, supported loudly by my parents, I already knew how this would end. Not because I was smarter, but because I was patient. When she announced her new role at another family dinner, everyone clapped. She talked about growth. Expansion. Speed. My parents beamed. I smiled. And took mental notes. She moved fast. Too fast. Decisions were made publicly. Processes were skipped quietly. People like speed, until speed costs them. I was copied on emails meant for visibility. Invited to meetings as support. Not decision-making. Observation. So I observed. When concerns were raised, they were brushed aside. When policies were referenced, they were summarized instead of followed. And when someone asked if everything was compliant, my sister laughed. That laugh stayed with me. Because it wasn't confidence. It was certainty without verification. The night everything shifted didn't feel dramatic at first. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a slight tightening in the air. A few emails marked urgent. Meetings rescheduled. People choosing words more carefully. My sister stopped posting updates. At home, my parents lowered their voices when talking about her work. No one told me anything. Which meant something was happening. One afternoon, I walked past my father's study. The door was half open. My sister was inside. Her voice was sharp. She was asking why no one had warned her. Someone replied calmly that warnings had been sent. That they were documented. I kept walking. Because by then, I already knew. And reacting early would have ruined the ending. The next few days moved strangely. Not fast. Not slow. Carefully. People at work started choosing their words like they were stepping on thin ice. Emails arrived with longer subject lines. More people added to the CC. Nothing explosive. Just, cautious. My sister noticed it too. She started staying later, talking louder in meetings, over-explaining decisions no one had questioned before. That's what panic looks like when it's trying to pass as control. At home, my parents defended her constantly, even when no one was accusing. She's under pressure. She's handling a lot. She knows what she's doing. They said it like repetition could turn hope into fact. I stayed quiet. Again. Because silence was still working. One evening, my mother asked if I had noticed anything unusual at work. I looked up from my plate, thought carefully, and said, "Things feel reviewed." She laughed lightly, as if reviews were harmless. Reviews are never harmless. They're just quiet. A week later, a formal email arrived. Not addressed to me directly, but I was copied. A joint meeting was requested. External representatives, senior advisors, documentation to be prepared in advance. At the bottom, one line stood out. Legal presence suggested, not required. That sentence doesn't scare people who've done nothing wrong. It terrifies people who rushed. My sister dismissed it immediately. Just protocol, she said at dinner. They do this all the time. My parents nodded. They asked me to attend too. Not as a professional. As family. Just to be there. I agreed. The meeting room was neutral. Too neutral. No branding. No comfort. Just a long table and neatly stacked folders. My sister arrived confident. Chin high. Shoulders back. My parents sat close to her. I took a seat slightly away. No one questioned it. The lead reviewer introduced himself calmly. No accusations. No tension. He spoke like someone who already knew the ending. He explained that during a recent transition of authority, certain procedures had been bypassed. Not aggressively. Not illegally on their own. But repeatedly. Patterns matter more than moments. He asked who had authorized those decisions. My sister answered without hesitation. Her voice was steady. Too steady. He asked if she had personally reviewed the full documentation. She said yes. He nodded. Then asked her to explain one specific timeline. Just one. She paused. Only for a second. But seconds matter. She tried again. This time, the explanation was close. But not exact. The reviewer didn't correct her. He turned a page. Then another. Then looked at me. And asked, were any concerns raised internally before these decisions were finalized? I felt my parents turn slightly. Just enough to notice. I nodded once. And slid a single printed email across the table. Dated months earlier. Addressed to my parents. Copied to internal compliance. Unopened. The room changed. Not dramatically. Heavily. My father's expression shifted first. Not anger. Recognition. The reviewer thanked me and continued. He explained that warnings had been issued. That documentation existed. That review processes had been advised. Because those warnings were acknowledged but not acted upon, responsibility now rested fully with the current authority. That meant audits. Temporary restrictions. And a suspension of expansion plans. Not punishment. Containment. My sister tried to speak. Her words came quickly now. Too quickly. She said she was fixing it. That she had everything under control. The reviewer nodded politely. And said something that landed harder than any accusation. Fixing it now prevents collapse. It doesn't erase record. The meeting ended quietly. No shouting. No drama. Just consequences unfolding on paper. The drive home was silent. At dinner that night, no one ate much. My sister stared at her plate. My parents avoided eye contact. Finally, my father looked at me. And asked, why didn't you say something sooner? I met his eyes. And answered calmly. I did. That was the moment the illusion cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. They saw it. Not what happened. But how it happened. Who had spoken loudly. And who had spoken carefully. Over the next few weeks, changes were described as temporary. Responsibilities were redistributed. Decisions slowed. Documents reviewed again. No announcements. No apologies. Just quiet correction. My sister didn't fight it. She couldn't. Speed was no longer valued. Precision was. and precision had never been her strength. One evening, she knocked on my door. No anger. No sarcasm. Just tired honesty. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She said, "I didn't think you mattered that much." I thought about it. Then replied, "Neither did I. That's why I paid attention." She nodded once. And left. At the next family gathering, no one compared us. No jokes. No measurements. They asked me questions. Waited for answers. Listened. And when I pushed my chair back this time, it wasn't to leave. It was because the seat at the head of the table was empty. And they were waiting. Patience doesn't look powerful until the moment it becomes undeniable. And by then, it's already too late to stop it. The change didn't happen overnight. That's what most people expect. A dramatic switch. A clear winner and a clear loser. Real reversals don't work like that. They arrive quietly. At first, my role was described as temporary assistance. Just to help stabilize things. Just to make sure processes were followed. No one announced it. But suddenly, decisions started passing through me. Not officially. Casually. "Can you take a look at this? Does this align with policy? Is this timeline realistic?" Small questions. But power lives in questions. My sister noticed. She stopped giving instructions. Started asking for updates. That shift alone told me everything. At home, my parents changed too. They didn't praise me. They didn't apologize. They adjusted. Which is harder? My mother started asking my opinion before speaking. My father waited instead of finishing my sentences. No one said my sister's name as often. Silence replaced comparison. And silence, this time, worked in my favor. Weeks passed. The audit moved forward. Not aggressively. Methodically. Every document I had quietly archived became relevant. Every note I had written for myself suddenly had value. I never volunteered information. I responded when asked. That distinction mattered. Because it made everything look inevitable. Like this was always how it was supposed to end. One afternoon, I was asked to lead a review session. Just internal. Nothing public. My sister sat across from me. For the first time in our lives, she waited for me to speak. I didn't enjoy it. That surprised me. There was no rush of victory. Just clarity. I realized something then. I hadn't wanted her to fail. I had just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own speed. The final shift happened during another dinner. Same table. Same chairs. Different energy. My father brought up a new initiative. Paused. And looked at me. "What do you think?" The table waited. Even my sister. I spoke slowly. Measured. I pointed out risks. Suggested pacing. Asked questions instead of making statements. Everyone nodded. My sister didn't interrupt. After dinner, she stayed back while my parents cleared the table. She leaned against the counter. And said quietly, "They listen to you now." I didn't respond immediately. Then I said, "They always could have." She exhaled. Not angrily. Relieved. Like someone finally allowed to stop pretending. A month later, the audit concluded. No scandal. No headlines. Just recommendations. And a formal restructuring. My sister retained her role. But with boundaries. Oversight. Checks she couldn't bypass. I was given a permanent position. Not above her. Beside the process. Which meant above chaos. At the announcement, people clapped politely. No one looked at me with surprise. That was the real win. It felt normal. Later that night, my mother came to my room. She sat on the edge of the bed. And said something she had never said before. "You were right to be quiet." I didn't say I know. I didn't say anything. Because this wasn't about winning an argument. It was about being seen. Now, when people hear this story, they expect revenge. Something sharp. Something loud. But revenge doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just stops covering for others. Sometimes it lets time do the work. And sometimes it waits patiently at the table. Until the chair at the head is empty. And no one questions why you're the one sitting there. The attention didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments. A question here. A pause there. People stopped assuming and started checking. That shift alone changed everything. In meetings, decisions slowed. Not because anyone asked them to, but because no one wanted to be wrong in front of the wrong person. And somehow, that person had become me. Not officially. Not loudly. Just consistently. Whenever uncertainty appeared, eyes moved in my direction. Not for permission. For confirmation. My sister noticed before anyone else. She started arriving early. Leaving later. Trying to reclaim momentum. But momentum without trust is just noise. One afternoon, she called a meeting without looping me in. That would have worked before. This time, half the attendees asked why I wasn't there. The meeting was postponed. She didn't say anything to me about it. But the silence between us changed. It wasn't hostile. It was cautious. At home, the tension was quieter than ever. My parents stopped discussing decisions openly. They asked questions instead. Not to challenge. To understand. That alone felt surreal. Years of comparison had trained me to shrink. Now, shrinking felt unnecessary. The real public reversal didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at a gathering. A large one. Extended family. Friends. People who loved stories. My sister was asked to speak. It used to be automatic. She stood up confidently. Started strong. But halfway through, she paused. Looked around. And asked, "Does that align with what we discussed?" Eyes turned. Not to my parents. To me. I didn't rush to answer. I waited. Then calmly said, "It depends on the timeline you're referencing." The room shifted. Not because of what I said. But because of how little I said. She tried to continue. But the rhythm was broken. People asked follow-ups. Real ones. And for the first time, she didn't have all the answers ready. Later that evening, my parents pulled me aside. Not privately. Just aside. My father asked how long I had been keeping records. I didn't answer directly. I said, "Long enough to know patterns repeat." He nodded slowly. My mother looked uncomfortable. Not defensive. Exposed. That night, I realized something important. They weren't choosing between us anymore. They were choosing stability. And stability doesn't care about favoritism. A few weeks later, there was another review. This one internal. No external pressure. Just clarity. Responsibilities were formally restructured. My sister was assigned oversight. I was assigned process control. That might sound small. It wasn't. Process control meant nothing moved without review. Without alignment. Without justification. She had authority. I had leverage. The system preferred leverage. People stopped bypassing steps. Because steps now remembered. My sister grew quieter. Not resentful. Wary. She didn't challenge me. She started asking before deciding. One evening, she sat beside me instead of across. And said, "You always knew this would happen, didn't you?" I thought about it. Then said, "I knew it could." She didn't argue. She just stared ahead. The final confirmation came from someone unexpected. A senior advisor I barely interacted with. He stopped me after a session. And said, "You don't interrupt. That's why people listen." I thanked him. But inside, I smiled. Because that had always been the point. Interrupting seeks attention. Waiting earns it. At the next dinner, the table felt different. Not tense. Balanced. My parents didn't lead the conversation. They followed it. Questions were asked thoughtfully. No comparisons. No measurements. When my sister spoke, she was heard. When I spoke, it was noted. There was room for both of us now. But the hierarchy was gone. Later that night, my mother said something quietly. Almost to herself. "We should have paid attention sooner." I didn't correct her. Because this wasn't about blame. It was about timing. And timing had finally caught up. The story people expected never came. No shouting match. No dramatic confrontation. Just a slow, undeniable shift. And that's what made it irreversible. Because when power changes quietly, no one can pretend it didn't happen. The collapse didn't come with embarrassment. It came with relief. That surprised everyone. Including her. The moment it became clear that nothing could be rushed anymore, my sister stopped trying to outrun the process. She still held her title. Still spoke in meetings. But the weight behind her words was gone. Not stripped. Redistributed. People no longer looked to her for finality. They looked to the system. And the system now paused at me. That's the thing about quiet reversals. They don't announce themselves. They become routine. One afternoon, a proposal came across my desk. Aggressive timeline. Big promises. Too much confidence. I flagged 3 points. Nothing dramatic. Just questions. The proposal stalled. Not because I rejected it. Because no one could answer them. My sister watched from across the table. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She nodded. And that was the moment I knew it was over. Not the rivalry. The illusion. Later that week, the final audit summary arrived. Clean. Clinical. No blame language. Just outcomes. Areas of concern addressed. Controls implemented. Future authority conditional on compliance. My sister read it twice. Then once more. She handed it back without comment. At home, my parents were quieter than ever. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. My father admitted something over tea. I thought confidence meant readiness. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't need to. My mother added, we didn't understand the difference between speaking and seeing. I let the silence sit. Because silence had earned its place. The final public moment came unexpectedly. A small gathering. Nothing official. Someone asked who was leading the next phase. There was a pause. Not long. But deliberate. My sister glanced at me. Then answered honestly. It's a shared effort. But process goes through her. She said it calmly. No bitterness. No sarcasm. Just fact. No one questioned it. That was the end. Not because she lost. But because everyone adjusted. And adjustment is permanent. Later that night, she stood at my door again. Different from the first time. She said, I used to think being loud meant being strong. I waited. She continued, I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I nodded. And said, I didn't realize either. She smiled. A small one. Then went back to her room. The next morning, I took my seat at the table. Not the head. Just centered. Balanced. No one made room. Because the space already existed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had earned it. I felt like it had finally noticed me. I used to think the moment of victory would feel louder. Clearer. Like something snapping into place. It didn't. It felt like breathing out after holding it in for years. Nothing around me changed dramatically. The room stayed the same. The people stayed the same. What changed was how they moved around me. Carefully. Respectfully. Without assumption. My parents didn't apologize. They didn't need to. They stopped explaining my sister to me. Stopped justifying choices. Stopped comparing. That silence was the apology. My sister didn't become smaller. She became precise. She learned to slow down. To check. To wait. And strangely, that made her better. Not above me. Beside me. For the first time, we weren't competing for attention. We were sharing responsibility. People ask me now how I planned it. What strategy one used. I tell them the truth. I didn't plan revenge. I planned survival. I paid attention when no one thought it mattered. I kept records when no one thought they'd be needed. I stayed calm when reacting would have felt satisfying. That's the part no one wants to hear. Because patience doesn't feel powerful while you're practicing it. It feels invisible. But invisibility has advantages. No one guards against what they don't notice. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Power doesn't always come from speaking louder. Sometimes it comes from listening longer. From letting people show you who they are. And trusting that time will eventually repeat the pattern back to them. I didn't take anything from my sister. I stopped covering for her. I didn't confront my parents. I let them see. And when the chair at the head of the table became empty, I didn't rush to claim it. I waited. Because the right seat doesn't need defending. It's offered. Quietly. Naturally. And once you're there, no one asks you to move.